oh, this person just likes drama. And
Mhm,
it really rubbed me the wrong way, number one, because I love the people I work with.
mhm,
And if somebody would say something like that about somebody I worked with,
mhm,
I'm like, first of all, then why don't you pull out your curiosity? Because it's normal for them to be in chaos.
mhm.
Without the
True.
presence of chaos, it can
Right.
feel really
Mhm.
uncomfortable.
It's
So
true.
I guess to answer your question, it's becoming aware of the
Mhm,
pattern. It's becoming like, "Oh my gosh, what am I feeling?" Because
mhm,
we're detached from
mm,
our
mm,
emotions and our feelings when
mhm,
we've lived in chaos because it's a survival mechanism. So
mhm,
we detach from
mhm,
all that and we are not in tune with our gut instinct. And so when we start to ask questions that allow us to become aware of who we are, that will put us on the path to move forward into
mhm,
choosing a different path.
mhm.
But from my experience, it's not easy work.
No.
I've been in therapy 15 years
Mhm,
now. I rarely see my therapist, but as of COVID right now, and there's just a lot going on with my daughter's health, there's so much on my
mhm,
plate right now. I'm seeing her again. And I still have things that I
mhm,
need to work on, like
mhm.
boundaries. We
Right.
talked about it's hard to say no. Why is it so
Right.
hard to say no? Well, did we grow up in homes where
Where it's
you
okay
weren't
to say
allowed
no.
to say no?
Right.
You had to do it, that you
Right.
had to eat that food. You
Mhm,
had to do that. You
mhm.
had to hug that uncle that you didn't want to hug.
Right.
All of those things
Right.
you don't learn to
Mm-mm.
instinctively. You detach from your gut
Mhm,
instinct to do what people want you to do
mhm.
to appease the people you're around. And
Correct.
therefore, we drop our authenticity
That's right.
to keep the attachment.
But you keep the level of comfortability that
Yes.
others are accustomed to,
Hmm.
when the true growth only happens when you're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that is the cycle of trauma that happens from generation to generation to generation. The one
Yeah.
example that I always like to use is the old clean up your plate
Ah,
adage that started, or maybe it was before,
yeah.
when food was scarce back in the Depression, right?
Yeah.
So my grandparents, who did grow up in the Depression, taught my parents to clean up their plates. So by the time I was growing up in the 80s, I had to clean up my plate.
Yeah.
And now my kids growing up in, 2010, what are they called? The tens, right? Now here we start over again.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a second. I didn't grow up in the Depression. My parents didn't grow up in the Depression. Why am I teaching my kids to clean their plates instead of listening to their bodies when they're full and saying, well, what do you think? Are you done
Yeah.
eating?
Yeah.
And that's just a small example of trauma passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah.
Imagine all the examples that you think about personally or that you've heard through your experience.
Oh, yeah.
That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's passed down genetically. So
Mhm.
even though there might be repeated patterns, it's phenomenal to me to think about because I'm such a nerd like that, but it's literally passed down in our genetics,
Mhm.
like memories.
Right.
And that's just incredible to think about, not like on a cool. I mean, it's a cool factor in the fact like, holy cow, like you can have the same things go
Yeah.
on from generation to generation.
Right.
And then it's like we have to, awaken ourselves if
Mhm.
we want to shift that freaking pattern
Right.
and heal our family, our
Mhm.
generation, our lineage, and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the conversation.
An uncomfortable
Oh, it's
conversation. Do
hard.
you know how hard it was for me to tell my parents about what happened to me when I was 14
Yeah.
and had that conversation? But it allowed me the opportunity to work through my emotional problems that I had and the distance that I had created between myself and my parents, but
Yeah.
to also move through that.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I can talk about it because it's an experience, it happened, but I don't have any emotional connection with that anymore. And I don't know whatever happened to that boy, right? I don't
Yeah.
know. And I don't harbor ill will anymore. I mean, he could, I don't know, he married, have a family of his own.
Yeah.
And that's on him.